The courtroom goes silent as a teenage millionaire throws a $1,000 bill onto Judge Hale's bench as if justice could be bought. The young man laughs, mocking the black judge before him, certain his money and family name will save him once again. But when the truth about how he got that car and who really paid for it starts to surface, arrogance turns to fear. How far will Judge Hale go to teach him that money can't outrun justice? If that moment made you feel something hit like, and share this story, then let's step inside the courtroom. I was sitting 3 rows back in Providence Municipal when the sun slid through the tall windows and drew long, bright stripes across the floor. Judge Raymond Hale took the bench like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Mid-50s, composed black with that steady gaze that tells you he's seen every trick before. He flipped open a thick file, set his glasses, and the room settled. You could hear shoes scuff a cough, being swallowed, the little clock over the seal ticking like a metronome for justice. Then the doors banged. A kid in a white suit strolled in like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a boutique. 17 blonde hair laid perfect, a diamond watch that flashed when it caught the sun. He didn't scan for the clerk or the bailiff. He didn't scan for anyone. He just let the room take him in. A man near me leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That's the Ward kid his dad owns, half the city." Heads tilted. Phones disappeared into pockets. Nobody wanted to miss this. Lucas Ward reached the defense table and didn't bother looking up until he did right at Judge Hale with a smile that wasn't a smile, more like a dare. "Didn't expect a black man to be the judge here," he said, casual as gum on a shoe. No gasp, no gavel slam. Judge Hale didn't flinch. He let the words hang there long enough to feel their weight and then answered in a voice that could cut velvet. "Color doesn't define justice. Behavior does." Lucas blinked like he hadn't planned on the line sticking. Then he dropped his bag with a thud, fell into the chair, swung one ankle across his knee and leaned back until the legs squeaked. "Fine," he said, bored already. "Let's make this quick." The clerk rose to read the charges. Paper rustled. A list that sounded like it could outlast the morning reckless driving, speed evasion, unpaid fines. While she read, Lucas took out his wallet with theatrical slowness, pinched a crisp $1,000 bill between 2 fingers, and slid it onto the bench as if he were tipping a valet. He didn't look at the clerk. He looked at the judge. "Can we just skip this?" he asked, soft but sharp enough to be heard everywhere. "My time's expensive." The room froze. I felt my shoulders climb toward my ears. A woman to my left clutched her purse, the leather creaking in her hands. Up on the bench, Judge Hale lowered his eyes to the money like it was a specimen. No rush, no outrage. He let silence do the heavy lifting, then said, "Keep it. You'll need it where you're going." Something in the air shifted like a screen door clicked shut, and the breeze changed direction. Lucas's smile faltered for a breath. "Not long. Just enough for you to see the boy inside the armor." Then he rolled his eyes and looked away, pretending he hadn't heard the first clean hit of the morning. The gallery started to hum the way a field of crickets starts up after a passing truck. An older black woman in the first row tilted toward her neighbor and whispered, not unkindly, not loudly, but with the finality of a church bell, "He just tried to buy justice." Bailiff Avery, a mountain in a blue uniform, stepped 1 pace closer to the table. Didn't touch the kid. Didn't need to. He just became part of the furniture in a way that furniture does not move. The clerk resumed, voice steadying. 22 citations within 6 months. She went on, but the numbers didn't matter yet. What mattered was how the kid sat there while his life was being itemized, tapping his sneaker against the chair leg and texting with his thumb like this was the world's dullest commercial break. Every now and then, his eyes flicked up to the seal above the judge, the eagle, the banner, the whole promise, and back down to his screen like he was weighing which one deserved his attention. Judge Hale let it play. That was the thing. He didn't rush to make a show. He gave Lucas the rope to measure himself. "Mr. Ward," he said, finally quiet enough that the clerk lowered her page. "You understand why you're here today?" Lucas tossed his phone face down, spread his hands, and smirked. "Because the cops hate fun. Because I drive better than they do. Because I'm a Ward." He said the last part like it should have come with confetti. A few folks sucked their teeth. Someone near the aisle muttered, "Lord have mercy." If you've ever been in a room where everyone agrees but nobody wants to speak first, You know that feeling, the pressure rising with nowhere to go. Judge Hale didn't blink. "You're here," he said, "because every choice leaves a mark." He tapped the file. "And these marks are no longer small." Lucas leaned forward, elbows on the table, like he was negotiating a return policy. "Look, Your Honor, judge whatever you prefer. Let's not make this a thing. We pay fines. We move on. Providence still gets its roads paved. Everybody wins." He said we like it was a private club. The judge's jaw worked once. I couldn't tell if it was anger or grief or both. "There is no we that stands above the law," he said, "and there is no price menu for dignity." Lucas tilted his head, tasting the line. "You practiced that." Avery's boots scuffed once on the tile. The clerk's eyes shifted just briefly to the $1,000 still sitting there, like a dare no one had accepted. Sunlight inched across it, turned the green to gold. From somewhere in the back, a man said under his breath, "His daddy can't catch that one." The sound rolled forward, a wave of whispers breaking against the front row. Lucas heard it. His neck stiffened. He didn't turn around, but the smirk crept back like a reflex. And then there was only the stare. Judge Hale and Lucas locked eyes, two different Americas in the same square of air. One built on nameplates and checks and doors that open. One built on rules that don't care who you are when the door closes. The judge's look wasn't a threat. It was a measurement. The kind a carpenter makes before he cuts, the kind a surgeon makes before he says scalpel. Lucas met it head on, chin up, as if to say, "You don't scare me." But there was a flicker, one small quiver at the corner of his mouth there, and gone like even he could feel the floor tilt. "That was the first time I thought he has no idea what kind of morning he just bought." The clerk's voice filled the courtroom again, crisp and steady, the kind of tone that could slice through the thick morning air. 22 violations in 6 months. Total fines $15,000. Lucas laughed loud enough to echo. "You people love counting. I just pay and move on." A hush rippled through the gallery. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "You people." Her tone wasn't anger, it was disbelief. Judge Hale tilted his head, the faintest motion, but it carried weight. "You people," he repeated quietly. Lucas smirked, flicking his wrist like the words were nothing. "You know, government workers." The room stiffened. You could almost hear the pulse of silence. Hale's eyes held steady on him. No anger, just patience honed over years of watching arrogance walk through those same doors. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low and calm. "In this courtroom, Mr. Ward, you're not buying time, you're earning truth." Lucas leaned back, still smiling. "Truth's overrated, Judge. Money's faster." He looked over his shoulder as if waiting for someone to laugh with him. No one did. Even the clerk's pen stopped mid-note. Trying to reclaim the spotlight, Lucas pulled out. His phone tapped a few times, then turned it toward the crowd. "You want to see something fun?" On the screen was a picture, neon lights, red cups, a crowd of kids laughing him front and center, throwing a peace sign. The caption read, "Beat the cops again." A collective murmur rolled through the room, the kind that starts as breath and turns into judgment. A man in the back whispered, "He's proud of breaking the law." Another voice followed, older, quieter. "His daddy's money won't save him forever." Judge Hale looked at the photo, his jaw tightening just a fraction. When he spoke, his words came measured, deliberate. "Every laugh you post online carries someone else's pain. You just can't see it yet." Lucas's grin widened. "Please, nobody got hurt." The judge's eyes lifted from the file and locked on the boy. "Not yet." That single phrase sank deep like a gavel hitting bone. The courtroom fell into silence again, the kind that hums beneath your skin. Lucas didn't move. For the first time, his smirk looked rehearsed. A moment later, the tension broke with a rustle of coats and nervous coughs. The clerk cleared her throat, trying to move things along, but the energy in the room had shifted. People weren't just watching anymore. They were judging. I glanced toward the front row where an older black woman sat straight back, her eyes on the judge. She shook her head slowly, whispering to her neighbor. "That boy's never been told no a day in his life." The man beside her muttered, "And he picked the wrong courtroom to learn it." Judge Hale didn't respond right away. He simply leaned back, fingers laced in front of him, studying the boy the way a sculptor studies a cracked piece of marble, wondering if it could be saved. "You've been given every chance," Hale said finally, voice steady, but edged with something deeper. And you use each one to prove you deserve none of them. Lucas laughed again, softer this time, but there was a tremor beneath it. You really think a speech fixes anything I pay, I leave? That's how it works. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench. That's how you think it works. But justice doesn't clock out when your wallet opens. That line hit different. The room was dead quiet except for the faint hum of the lights above. Even Lucas's phone screen, still glowing with his party photos, seemed out of place now, like a souvenir from a life that didn't belong here. He shifted in his chair, trying to look relaxed, but something in his posture cracked. Maybe it was the weight of the silence. Maybe it was the way Judge Hale kept looking at him, not as a threat, but as a mirror. From the back, someone whispered, "He's used to paying his way out." Another voice answered, "Not this time." Hale finally spoke again, calm but firm. "You've mistaken privilege for freedom, Mr. Ward. They're not the same. One can disappear the moment you meet a man who can't be bought." Lucas's smile faded, just a little. The judge nodded toward the clerk. "Proceed." But no one moved right away. The tension hung there, thick and heavy, like the pause before thunder. I could feel it too, something shifting under the marble floors, as if the balance in the room had quietly changed hands. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a test of pride, of patience, of what happens when arrogance meets a man who's carried the weight of real struggle. And as I watched Lucas pick up his phone again, pretending to scroll, I couldn't help thinking he still believed he was in control. He didn't see it yet, but everyone else did. That was the moment the courtroom stopped being a stage and became a reckoning waiting to happen. The silence had stretched so long, you could almost hear the walls breathe until a voice from the front row cut through it, polished and practiced. "Your Honor, please." All eyes turned. Miranda Ward, tall, graceful, wrapped in a pearl gray suit that probably cost more than most cars in the parking lot. Her tone was soft, but carried that edge, the kind that only comes from years of getting her way. "My son didn't mean any of this," she said smoothly. "Let's not make it political." The courtroom seemed to tighten again, every word measured like a thread pulled too hard. Judge Hale looked up slowly, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. "I'm not political," he said. "I'm legal." "And moral." Miranda gave a tight smile like someone correcting a waiter. "Of course you are." Lucas leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. "See, Mom," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "He's already sensitive." A ripple of unease passed through the gallery. Hale didn't respond right away. He picked up the file again, flipping a page. The sound of paper turning filled the silence. Then his voice came low but deliberate. "Interesting. This vehicle. It isn't in your name, Mr. Ward." He paused. "Or your father's." Lucas smirked, unbothered. "Grandma's name. She's cool with it." The judge's pen stopped midair. He looked at the clerk, then at the bailiff. "Bring her in," he said. The words landed like a gavel. You could feel the air change, curiosity mixing with something heavier. The doors opened slow and reluctant, and an elderly woman stepped through. Evelyn Ward. She was small, almost fragile, her white hair gathered in a bun, one hand gripping a cane that clicked softly with each step. Her eyes, pale and gentle, scanned the room like she wasn't sure why she was there. The gallery stirred. I heard a whisper behind me. "That's his grandmother." Even Lucas turned slightly in his chair, though the grin stayed. "She'll back me up," he said under his breath. The bailiff guided her to the witness chair. Hale waited until she was settled, his tone softening, just enough to meet her halfway. "Mrs. Ward," he said respectfully, "thank you for being here. Do you understand why you've been called in today?" She nodded faintly. "Something about my grandson's car, I believe." Her voice trembled, but there was warmth in it, a kindness untouched by the room's tension. "Yes, ma'am," Hale said gently. "Your name is listed as the registered owner." She blinked, confused. "That can't be right. I don't even drive anymore." Every head turned toward Lucas. He forced a laugh. "She's mistaken, Your Honor. I handled the paperwork for her. She just signed where I told her to." A sharp inhale swept through the audience, one sound shared by dozens of people at once. Miranda shifted in her seat, crossing her legs, her jewelry catching the light. "Judge," she said coolly, "my mother-in-law isn't well. She gets things mixed up easily. We don't need to drag her into this." Hale's gaze moved to her. Mrs. Ward, I will not drag anyone into anything. But when legal ownership is in question, the truth belongs to the person whose name appears on the document. Miranda tried to smile again, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're making this sound far more serious than it is. The judge didn't flinch. It is serious. For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom felt smaller. The gallery leaned in, every breath held waiting. Twinsen, Ward folded her hands over her cane, eyes still unsure. Lucas told me it was just something for taxes, she said softly. He brings me forms all the time. I never ask questions. Lucas interjected quickly, his tone half playful, half defensive. Yeah, see, she trusts me. It's fine. But the word trust landed differently this time, like a crack echoing through glass. Judge Hale studied him, and there was something colder now in his stare, less disappointment, more calculation. Trust, he said slowly. A dangerous word when it's one-sided. Lucas gave a little shrug, flashing that same grin he'd been hiding behind all morning. Relax, Judge. My grandma knows I take care of things. The judge's eyes drifted toward Mrs. Ward. Do you know what your grandson has been taking care of? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at Lucas, the kind of look that comes from years of love, mixed with the first sting of doubt. In the gallery, someone whispered, he used her name. Another voice answered, and her trust. The room's energy changed again, less anger, now more disbelief. The arrogance that had been amusing moments ago turned suddenly cruel. Lucas leaned back, arms crossed. You're all overreacting. It's just a car. Hale let out a long breath through his nose like a man holding in the storm. A car is just a machine, he said. But deceit, Mr. Ward, that's a choice. Miranda shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. Her confidence flickered as she glanced at her son. But Lucas didn't see it. He was too busy smirking, enjoying the attention, blind to the wall of eyes closing in on him. Judge Hale closed the file, the snap of the folder echoing like a distant gunshot. Mrs. Ward, he said gently, I need you to stay a bit longer. We have questions to clarify. She nodded, folding her trembling hands in her lap. The bailiff stayed beside her, silent but solid. The gallery had gone utterly still. Nobody coughed, nobody moved. Even the ticking clock seemed to slow. And just then, for the first time that morning, Lucas looked uncertain. His grin lingered, but his eyes darted toward the judge, toward his mother, then back to his grandmother, whose hands were shaking around the handle of her cane. That was the moment it shifted again. The arrogance started to slip, replaced by the faint outline of fear. I remember thinking no one in that room breathed the same way after she walked in. The courtroom wasn't angry anymore. It was waiting. Judge Hale's tone softened, but the quiet in his voice carried more weight than anger ever could. Ma'am, he said, did you know you're listed as the legal owner of this car? Mrs. Evelyn Ward turned toward him slowly. Her eyes blinked behind thick glasses and her fingers tightened on her cane. He said it was tax paperwork, she whispered. Something for property records. I trusted him. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Lucas leaned forward, scoffing. She signs everything. She's old. Don't make this dramatic. A sharp inhale rippled through the gallery. From the second row, a black woman in a blue dress shook her head, muttering just loud enough to carry privilege with no heart. The words hit harder than any gavel. Lucas's smirk twitched, but he didn't stop. Judge Hale folded his hands, voice calm but cold. You tricked your grandmother into debt. That's not youth, Mr. Ward, that's fraud. Lucas opened his mouth ready with another careless remark, but before he could speak, Mrs. Ward's voice trembled through the air. I gave him my pension, she said, her lip quivering. Every month. He said it was for taxes. I didn't understand. I thought I was helping. Her voice broke on that last word. A single tear rolled down her cheek, glinting in the courtroom light. And that's when the anger began to rise. Not loud, not wild, but a slow burn that filled the room. People shifted in their seats. One man whispered, she gave him her retirement, and the rest of us felt the weight of it. Judge Hale's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes hardened. You used her love, he said quietly, as your loophole. Lucas slammed his palm on the table. This is a family matter. The sound cracked through the room, but Hale didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. Family doesn't protect lies, he said. It reveals truth. Those words didn't just echo, they landed. I watched Lucas's confidence drain like color from a fading photo. His shoulders slumped just a little, but enough for everyone to see the shift. Mrs. Ward covered her mouth with one hand. I thought I was helping, she repeated. I thought he needed me. In the back, someone said he used her. Another voice followed. That boy's never worked for a thing in his life. The whispers multiplied, spreading like ripples on water, quiet outrage turning into something sharper. Lucas tried to speak again, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. You don't understand, Your Honor. It's not what it looks like. Hale stood now slow but deliberate, his robe falling heavy against the bench. Then explain it, he said. Because from where this court stands, it looks like theft wrapped in family. Lucas didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed again. The silence that followed was worse than any confession. Mrs. Ward bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. Hale's voice softened, but it carried the weight of every moral wound he'd seen walk through that courtroom. You've done something no law can undo, he said. You've turned love into leverage. Lucas's eyes darted between his mother, the gallery, and his grandmother, who sat broken in her chair. For the first time, the mask cracked. His confidence wasn't arrogance anymore, it was panic. In the gallery, the murmurs became a wave. Someone muttered, "He's heartless." Another said, "Lock him up." The judge raised a hand for silence, but the emotion in the room had already taken root. This wasn't about fines or citations anymore. It was about betrayal, the kind that money can't excuse. I could feel the shift like air before a storm. Lucas wasn't the charming rebel anymore. He was the villain of his own story, and everyone knew it. Judge Hale turned to the clerk. Record this, he said. We're no longer discussing reckless driving. We're discussing exploitation and fraud. The clerk nodded, her hand shaking as she wrote. Mrs. Ward looked up again, eyes glassy. He's my grandson, she said softly. I love him. The judge nodded once solemnly. Love isn't blind, ma'am, but sometimes it's misled. That line hit me deep. You could see it ripple through the room. The whispers stopped. Even the boy who'd been smirking minutes ago was now staring at his hands. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. Not the judge, not the bailiff, not even Lucas. It was as if the whole courtroom was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then it did. Not with shouting, not with chaos. Just with the quiet realization spreading across every face. This wasn't a case about a spoiled teenager anymore. It was about what happens when privilege grows so loud it can't hear love whisper, stop. That was the moment the room turned on him. The pity vanished. The anger took its place. And for the first time since he walked into that courtroom, Lucas Ward looked like a boy who finally understood the real debt he owed had nothing to do with money. Judge Hale broke the silence with a quiet command. Clerk, bring me the bank statements. The clerk nodded and disappeared behind the bench. Moments later, she returned with a thick folder, not the usual thin stack of traffic citations, but something heavier. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the courtroom. Hale opened it slowly, page after page, each one covered in numbers, transfers, withdrawals. The steady rhythm of paper turning was louder than any voice in the room. Then he looked up. Mrs. Ward, these records show multiple withdrawals from your pension account, he said. Funds transferred to a car dealership, several bars, and 2 casinos. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Someone whispered, he gambled her money. Mrs. Ward's hand trembled on her cane. Her voice came out faint but clear. He told me it was for home repairs. She looked at Lucas, and the look was enough to still every whisper. He said the roof was leaking, and the government would fine me if I didn't fix it. Hale's hand rested on the folder, his knuckles white against the dark wood. You didn't just break traffic laws, he said quietly. You broke her trust. The words hung there. They didn't need volume to strike. They carried the kind of weight that lands straight in your gut. Lucas shot up from his chair. This is a setup, he shouted. You're all biased. The room stiffened again. Hale didn't move. His expression didn't change. He tilted his head slightly, one brow lifting. Biased, he said evenly. Against what greed, a quiet ripple of breath went through the spectators like the whole room exhaled at once. A man in the back muttered, "He's digging his own grave." Lucas turned toward the voice face, red eyes wild. "You don't know me," he snapped. "You don't know anything about me." Hale leaned back in his chair, still calm, still unshaken. "I know enough," he said. "I know that everything in this file tells me who you are, even when your words don't." The gallery stayed dead still. Even Miranda Ward, who had been trying to look indifferent, was now staring at her son with something close to fear. Lucas slammed his hand against the table. "You're just doing this to prove a point," he barked, his voice cracking, "because your black gasps filled the room." The air changed again, colder, heavier. I felt my stomach drop. For a moment, even Judge Hale didn't speak. He sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the boy. When he finally did speak, his voice was low, calm, and sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't need to prove my color," he said. "Only your conscience." The silence that followed was alive. You could almost feel the heartbeat of the room, steady, slow waiting. Lucas looked around for support, his mother, the gallery, anyone, but all he saw were faces turned against him. People who had once looked merely curious now looked disgusted. The pity was gone. What replaced it was something colder, judgment. Even Miranda's eyes were wet now, her composure cracking like old porcelain. She whispered Lucas stop, but it was too late. He wasn't hearing anyone anymore. Judge Hale folded the papers neatly and set them aside. When he spoke again, his tone was steady but final. "Privilege is a shield until the truth catches up," he said. "And the truth is here, Mr. Ward." The gallery broke its silence, murmurs, a few quiet claps from the back, not applause, but something like approval. Respect. Lucas stood frozen, his face pale, his arrogance stripped bare. The $1,000 bill from earlier was still sitting on the edge of the bench, a reminder of how it all started. Judge Hale's gaze flicked to it, then back to the boy. "You thought money could buy respect," he said. "But respect doesn't take cash. It takes character." Lucas's lips parted like he wanted to argue, but no words came out. For a moment I could see it, the illusion breaking. The proud teenager, the rich kid who laughed at rules shrinking under the weight of his own choices. No one spoke. Not the judge. Not the lawyers. Not even the bailiff. The only sound was the faint rattle of Mrs. Ward's cane as she wiped her tears. That was the moment the courtroom shifted again from anger to quiet disgust. Everyone there knew this wasn't about race anymore, or money or fines. It was about decency. Judge Hale looked down at the file one last time, his voice nearly a whisper. "Justice doesn't bow to privilege. It waits for truth." And in that moment, for the first time, Lucas didn't look powerful. He looked alone. The courtroom doors opened again, this time without a sound. You could tell by the way everyone turned that whoever walked in mattered. A man in a gray suit stepped through, tall, sharp, the kind of presence that didn't need to speak to be felt. Richard Ward. His hair was silvered at the temples, his tie perfectly knotted, his face unreadable. He didn't rush, didn't look around, just walked straight to the front like he owned the space. The kind of walk that says, "I've bought my way through harder rooms than this one?" Lucas straightened in his seat, relief flickering across his face. "Dad," he whispered, almost smiling. Richard didn't smile back. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked up at Judge Hale with that cool, professional politeness that comes with power. "Judge Hale," he said, "let's handle this quietly." The words landed soft, too soft. But everyone heard what he meant. Hale's gaze didn't waver. Quietly, he repeated. Then leaning forward slightly, he added, "You mean you don't want a black judge disciplining your son?" The air froze. It wasn't a question meant to provoke. It was a truth dragged into daylight. Richard didn't answer. His jaw tightened, eyes lowering for half a second. It was all the confirmation anyone needed. Hale didn't push. He simply said, "Your silence screams louder than his laughter." Lucas turned half amused, half uneasy. Dad always said power fixes everything, he said, with a smirk like the line had worked for him before. Judge Hale's voice dropped, low, almost gentle. "Then your father taught you how to lose your soul elegantly." The line hit like a stone in still water. Richard's head lifted, his mask cracking just enough for everyone to see it. A father whose pride had become his shield. He turned to Lucas, his voice suddenly sharp. "You embarrassed me," he said. Lucas's smirk vanished. His reply came fast bitter. You built me this way. It was the first real hit between them, not physical, but worse. You could feel years of distance collapse into that one sentence. Richard blinked, stunned. For the first time, he didn't seem like the man in control. The gallery shifted, uncomfortable, watching power unravel in real time. Hale sat still, studying the two men, like they were a mirror of everything he'd fought against his entire life: entitlement on one side, consequence on the other. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. I've spent my life proving justice has no color, he said. Then his voice strengthened. Today, maybe it finally shows. Lucas slumped back into his chair, eyes darting between his father and the judge. The smirk was gone. The arrogance, too. What was left looked more like confusion, a boy realizing his father's shadow didn't protect him anymore. Richard straightened his jacket, forcing composure back into his face. Judge Hale, he said stiffly, my son will make amends. We'll take care of this matter. Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. You can't buy back what he's taken, he said, and you can't manage integrity like a company. For a second, nobody moved. You could almost hear the clock on the back wall tick. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked smaller now, not in stature, but in certainty. He'd come to save his son, but all he'd done was expose the foundation they'd both been standing on. Hale leaned forward once more. Your son isn't on trial for his wealth, he said softly. He's on trial for what he's done with it. The weight of that truth filled every corner of the room. I watched Richard's shoulders sink, his expression cracking with something close to shame. He didn't look at his son again, just down at the floor, like it had finally pulled his reflection into focus. Lucas stared ahead, pale and silent. For the first time, he didn't look like a kid who thought he could win. He looked like someone who just realized how deep his father's silence ran and how alone it felt. And Judge Hale, sitting there beneath the seal of justice, looked calm but heavy, like a man carrying the truth of 1,000 stories just like this one. Men born into privilege, taught that power was protection, finally meeting the one place it couldn't reach. The moment hung there, cold, quiet, undeniable. Then Hale said, almost like a prayer, justice doesn't bow to wealth. It only listens to truth. And the room for once had nothing left to say. The courtroom had already felt heavy before, but when the man with the crutch stood up, the weight found a center. He rose carefully, one palm pressed to the pew for balance, then squared himself with a soldier's quiet pride. The rubber tip of his crutch met the tile with a dry tap. My name's Marcus Bryant, he said. That minor crash he keeps talking about. It took my leg. Sound left the room. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to fade. I watched Lucas, his shoulders jerked like someone had touched a live wire. Color bled from his face, leaving him the shade of the paper on the clerk's desk. Judge Hale turned toward Marcus. You were the victim in that incident. His voice didn't rise. It reached. Marcus nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. He shifted, careful. I'm a Marine, or I was till the night at Rockwell and 8th. I was crossing on the walk signal. He came out of nowhere. Didn't slow, didn't stop. He didn't point at Lucas. He didn't have to. The line from his eyes to that table was straight as a rifle sight. Lucas swallowed. His hand slid off the edge of the defense table and found nowhere to rest. For the first time, he wasn't acting. He was trying not to shake. Hale glanced down at the file, then back up. The judge's face barely moved, but I saw it, a shadow pulled across his gaze, the kind of man wears when his private history brushes against someone else's pain. And after the collision, he asked softly what happened. Marcus's jaw worked. I hit the asphalt. I remember headlights and the taste of metal. He leaned out the window, laughing. Said, my lawyer will crush you. Then the car took off. The gallery gasped in one breath. A woman behind me put a fist to her mouth and whispered. He laughed at pain. Lucas's eyes flinched closed. When they opened, they wouldn't lift higher than the grain of the wood. The swagger he'd worn like armor all morning fell off him and clattered on the floor, where no one could see it, only hear the echo of it leaving. Judge Hale's voice turned low, the kind of low that carries farther than a shout. Every scar in this room, he said, carries your name, Mr. Ward. Nobody moved. The line landed like a verdict hadn't yet. The clerk stopped writing. Miranda Ward's hand crept to her mouth and stayed there, a white half-moon against her lipstick. Richard Ward's spine, so straight a moment ago, softened like heat had found it. Lucas didn't speak. His fingers curled into his palm, then opened, then curled again, small helpless motions, like someone testing whether a door is locked when they already know it is. I looked at the judge. For a heartbeat, his gaze slipped past the bench to some place outside the room, like he was standing at the edge of another memory, another intersection, another boy laughing at the wrong time. Then he set the file down, and the distance left his eyes. They were present, again focused, steady. Mr. Bryant Hales said, "How has your life changed since that night?" Marcus took a breath, and I swear the room breathed with him. "I used to run 3 miles before sunrise," he said. "Now I count steps to the mailbox. I used to work double shifts at the docks. Now I hold on to rails when the shower water hits wrong." He let out a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I still thank God I'm alive, but I had to learn a new way to be me." The sentence sank like a stone in a calm pond. Rings of silence spread outward. Lucas's throat clicked. His lips parted, a word forming that didn't find a voice. He blinked hard, as if that could delete a caption that had been stamped across his life. "Beat the cops again." Marcus lifted his chin. "You know what hurt most, Judge? Not the leg, not the surgeries. It was the laughter. The idea that my pain was some rich kid's joke." Hale held his gaze. "Pain is never a punchline," he said. "Not in this room." From the far aisle, a quiet amen drifted and settled, respectful. Marcus turned toward Lucas, not cruel, not gloating. Just a man with the authority of lived truth. "I don't want your money," he said. "I want your attention." Lucas finally looked up. What I saw there wasn't defiance. It was the raw, gray confusion of a boy standing where the map runs out. His jaw trembled. He pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth to make it stop. It didn't. Judge Hale watched him, not as a hunter watches prey, but as a teacher measures a moment. I could feel it. The judge was deciding which words would pry open a door that arrogance had nailed shut. Mr. Ward Hale said, gentle and immovable, "Do you have anything to say to Mr. Bryant?" Lucas's mouth opened. Nothing came. He tried again. Air, no syllables. His hand found the edge of the table and gripped it like a ledge. That was the first true silence from him all morning, the kind that isn't empty but crowded with everything a person tried not to feel. Marcus broke the tension with mercy. He looked back at the bench. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, voice lowering. "For listening when others wouldn't?" Hale's reply was simple and steady, an oath more than a sentence. "This court hears what the world ignores." He paused, then added, quiet, proud, and unafraid, "Today justice has a black face and an honest heart." No one clapped. They stood. Not showy, not coordinated, just one pair of feet after another, choosing to rise. Respect can be louder than applause when it wants to be. In that hush, I saw Lucas press his thumb hard into the base of his palm, like pain could wake him from himself. His eyes shone not with tears exactly, but with the shock of contact, his choices touching someone else's life and not bouncing off. Miranda sat back down, defeated by a truth she couldn't soft sell. Richard stared at the floor as if numbers might save him there. They didn't. Judge Hale nodded to the bailiff. "Please help Mr. Bryant to a seat." The bailiff moved careful and quiet, like the moment itself was made of glass. As Marcus settled, he glanced once more at Lucas. There was no triumph in it. If anything, there was an invitation, be better. I felt the room exhale a long, shivering breath. What began as a traffic case had become a mirror, and nobody liked everything they saw in it. Lucas lowered his head. Not because he'd been told to, but because for the first time he didn't know how to lift it. The laugh that had carried him through 100 parties had nowhere to go here. The $1,000 bravado on the bench looked smaller than a receipt, and for one clean second, thin, fragile reel, I watched understanding touch him. Not redemption, not yet, but the first footprint in its direction. That was the moment the story crossed a line. From offense to consequence. From noise to truth. And every person in that courtroom felt that the reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived. Marcus had barely eased himself off the stand when the sound changed. Some rooms have a way of warning you. A thin, ragged breath cut through the hush. Mrs. Evelyn Ward's hand slipped from her cane. Her eyes fluttered once, twice, then rolled back. She sagged sideways like the air had left her all at once. "Ma'am," the bailiff barked, lunging, but Lucas was faster. He dropped to his knees so hard the echo snapped off the walls. "Grandma, please." His voice cracked into pieces. He gathered her hands, small, paper-thin, cold at the fingertips, and rubbed them like warmth could be willed back by guilt alone. People stood halfway, then stopped as if the floor itself had said, "Don't move." The clerk's pen clattered to the desk and stayed there. Miranda's hand flew to her mouth. Richard took one step another, then stalled as if the path between him and his family had lengthened in a single breath. Judge Hale rose. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His robe fell into place as he stood, and the bench seemed taller for it. "Now you feel the fear you've caused," he said, slow and even. Lucas pressed his forehead to his grandmother's knuckles. The bravado, the smirk, the $1,000 swagger gone. In its place, there was just a boy who had run out of excuses. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, "not for the room, not for the judge, just to the woman whose name he'd spent like a credit line. I'm sorry, I swear I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it." The bailiff knelt on the other side, 2 fingers to her wrist, eyes on the rise and fall of her chest. "She's breathing," he said low. "Shallow." He glanced up. Water. A juror cup appeared from nowhere. Lucas lifted it with shaking hands, wetting his grandmother's lips, whispering things I couldn't hear, childhood words maybe, or promises he should have made years ago. Around us, the gallery breathed as one in on hope, out on fear. Richard Ward finally reached them, hand outstretched to pull his son back into composure. Before he could touch him, Judge Hale raised a palm. "Let him learn humility." The line landed like a hand on his shoulder. Richard froze, then let his arm fall. He stepped back, swallowed hard, and did the hardest thing a powerful man can do: nothing. Mrs. Ward's eyelids trembled. She made a soft sound, a thread pulling through fabric. Lucas bent closer. "Grandma." It was small, the word a child uses when he knows the dark can hear him. Her eyes opened to slits. She took a thin breath, then another, and found her grandson's face with a softness that had no guardrails. When she spoke, her voice was frayed but clear. "Teach him kindness, Your Honor." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea to be avenged. It was a request from someone who had been harmed and still chose a better world. Judge Hale's throat worked once before he answered. "That's the only justice worth serving." The words were steady, but I felt the weight behind them, the years, the losses, the stubborn belief that people can still turn. The EMTs were already moving, called by the bailiff, with a quiet nod. They came in like rain after heat, efficient, respectful, all business and all care. They checked her pulse, her pupils, her pressure. Lucas didn't let go of her hand. He just shifted enough to make room, eyes never leaving her face. Tears running the kind of path that cleans more than it stains. "Sir," one EMT murmured to Lucas, "we're going to lift her now." He nodded clumsy with yes and helped guide the stretcher straps like he was learning a new language, the grammar of care. As they lifted Mrs. Ward, she turned her head toward Lucas, frail as a leaf and somehow stronger than steel. "No more lies," she whispered. He nodded like confession. "No more," he said, voice shaking, but sure. "I promise." They started for the door. The courtroom parted without being told, men who had muttered for punishment, women who had bristled at arrogance, all of them softening in the presence of something purer, love that refuses to quit. Richard stepped back to make space. Miranda reached for Lucas's shoulder and stopped, hand hovering in midair, caught between the reflex to protect and the knowledge that protection had brought them here. When the stretcher passed the bench, Judge Hale inclined his head, a small bow from the law to the person the law exists to protect. The EMTs disappeared through the doors. The handles swung side and stilled. Silence. Then the room exhaled in ragged unison. Lucas stayed on his knees, palms flat on the tile, as if letting go of his grandmother's hand had taken his balance with it. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist and stared at the wet mark like it was evidence, proof that something real had finally reached him. Judge Hale sat again, but the authority didn't sit with him. It spread. He looked at Lucas the way a good teacher looks at a student who has finally failed at pretending. "Stand if you can," he said, gentle. Lucas pushed himself up, unsteady. He didn't reach for the chair. He faced the bench, eyes raw and open. Whatever boy had strutted in that morning had left with the stretcher. What stood now was closer to a beginning than a defense. This moment, Hale said, will do what your fines never could. Remember the way your chest felt when you thought she might not breathe again. Burn it into your bones. Let it speak when pride gets loud. Lucas nodded. No backtalk, no clever line, just yes. The judge glanced at the gallery. We will recess briefly, he said. When we return, we'll speak of accountability and what it looks like when it grows from remorse, not fear. He tapped the gavel once. Not thunder heartbeat. Around me, coats whispered, benches creaked, throats cleared. People moved like they were leaving a church after a hard sermon, quieter than they came softer with each other. And under it all, there was the thin sound of someone crying, held in not hidden, echoing, just long enough to remind every one of us what the morning had cost and what it might yet save. When the court reconvened, the air felt different, thinner, heavier, like the weight of what had just happened was still sitting in every seat. The chatter was gone. Even the sound of the clerk's papers seemed too loud. Judge Hale stood slowly. His robe swayed in the hush, the morning sun cutting a gold line across the bench. This court, he began, his voice steady but deep enough to reach the last row, isn't about vengeance. It's about accountability. Every word landed with intention, the kind that doesn't need volume, only truth. He paused, letting the sentence breathe before continuing. And accountability, he said, means that no one, not money, not privilege, not power, stands above the law. The silence broke into an inhale, the sound of people realizing they were witnessing something larger than one verdict. Judge Hale picked up the case file, fingers resting on its worn edges. Effective immediately, he announced the vehicle in question, the sports car registered under Mrs. Evelyn Ward's name, will be seized by the state. Lucas's head snapped up. Hale didn't flinch. All associated contracts and financial obligations tied to her will be voided and her accounts restored. The evidence of fraudulent transfer, he lifted another sheet, will be referred to the district attorney's office for formal review. It was clean, sharp, irrevocable. Lucas shot up from his seat. You can't do this. My dad. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Sit down. The room jumped. Hale's eyes burned steady. In this courtroom, he said, voice rising, for the first time that day, money kneels before justice. The words rippled through the gallery. Not applause, not gasps, just the low hum of something like pride waking up. Lucas froze, half standing, then sank back into his chair, hands gripping the sides as though they could anchor him to the version of his life that was slipping away. His eyes darted toward his father, but Richard didn't meet them. The older man sat motionless, head bowed, face blank, like someone staring at the blueprint of his own failure. Then in the back row, Marcus Bryant stood, slowly. One hand still on his crutch, the other pressed to his side. He straightened, raised his chin, and gave a sharp, solemn salute. You made us proud today, sir, he said. His voice carried the weight of generations, not loud, but unshakable. Judge Hale's face softened. For the first time all day, his lips curved just slightly. Justice isn't blind, he said, returning the look. It just took too long to see clearly. The moment hung there, two black men, different paths, same fight, and every person in that courtroom knew it wasn't just about one spoiled boy or one stolen car. It was about all the quiet wrongs that never made it this far. Miranda Ward wiped her cheeks, mascara streaking like confessions. Richard kept his head bowed, unable to hide behind silence anymore. And Lucas? He crumbled, shoulders shaking, breath, stuttering, a sound breaking out of him that wasn't anger this time. It was surrender. Judge Hale leaned forward slightly, his tone lower now, almost fatherly. For years, he said, they doubted black justice. They called it biased, angry, unfit. He looked out across the room at Marcus, at the clerks, at the people standing in the aisles, because there weren't enough seats left for everyone who came to see how this would end. Today, he said, it stands. A woman near the front pressed her hands together. Someone else whispered, Amen. Then another. Then a soft wave of applause rose and fell, gentle, not triumphant, a sound of relief. Hale raised a hand and the room settled again. Justice, he said quietly, doesn't belong to color or class. It belongs to those who keep faith when the world forgets it. Marcus nodded, tears wetting the edges of his worn uniform sleeve. You did good, Your Honor, he said softly. Real good. Hale gave him a single nod in return. No, he replied. We did. He looked once more at Lucas, who sat with his head in his hands, the diamond watch still glinting faintly on his wrist, a reminder of how thin the line between privilege and punishment can be. This case Hale finished will go down not as a sentence, but as a reckoning. The gavel struck one last time. The sound rolled through the chamber like a heartbeat, one that belonged to everyone there. And in that quiet, after you could feel what the story had become. Not about color, not about class, but about a courtroom where for once justice finally looked like everyone who believed in it. A few days later, the courthouse looked softer. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, brushing against polished wood and white marble. The tension that once filled this room had thinned into quiet expectation. Mrs. Evelyn Ward was wheeled inside, fragile but smiling faintly. The gallery stood as she passed, some out of respect, others out of something deeper gratitude that she'd made it back. Lucas followed a few steps behind, eyes low, suit plain this time. No watch, no swagger, just a boy stripped down to consequence. Judge Hale rose as they approached. "Mrs. Ward," he said gently, "it's good to see you well again." She nodded, voice soft. "Better than I deserved, maybe, but alive." He smiled faintly. "You've been asked to return so that we can resolve the matter formally." He paused. "Do you wish to press charges against your grandson for the fraud and exploitation?" The room held its breath. Evelyn's hands folded in her lap, fingers trembling slightly. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "I don't want him punished. I just want him to change." The answer landed quietly, but it reached everyone. Judge Hale's eyes softened. "Then he will rebuild, not rot," he said. "This court believes in repair, not ruin." He turned toward Lucas. "Mr. Ward, you are hereby sentenced to 6 months of community service at the Providence Veterans Hospital. You will serve those who served others. You will see what courage looks like and what humility requires." Lucas nodded, voice low. "Yes, Your Honor." The next scene unfolded not in a courtroom, but in a long white hallway, smelling faintly of antiseptic and hope. Lucas pushed a wheelchair with careful hands. In it sat Marcus Bryant, his crutch folded beside him, his leg replaced by metal and quiet strength. "Slow down, rookie," Marcus teased, a half smile tugging his face. Lucas grinned faintly. "You used to walk faster than I can push." "Still do," Marcus shot back. Then after a moment his tone softened. "You can't undo pain, kid, but you can stop repeating it." Lucas stopped the chair and met his eyes. "I judged you that night," he said quietly, "for your color, for your uniform. But you judged me for my heart, and you were right." Marcus's gaze lingered on him, steady and forgiving. "Then that's your first step toward earning it back." From the doorway, Judge Hale watched. He'd come to check on the program, but stayed longer than planned. His arms were folded loosely, expression unreadable, but proud. The sunlight fell across his face, catching the edges of silver in his hair. He murmured to the clerk beside him, though maybe it was to himself. "Justice isn't colorblind," he said softly. "It's color-wise. It sees the world as it is and chooses to make it better." Outside, autumn leaves brushed the windows. Inside, the rhythm of mops and rolling wheels echoed a small human music of second chances. Weeks later, Mrs. Evelyn came to visit. Lucas met her in the hospital garden, where veterans sat under old oak trees. She reached for his hand, her skin cool and fragile. "I see you working," she said. "That's enough for me." Lucas smiled, eyes wet. "I'm trying, Grandma. I really am." "I know," she whispered. "Just keep being someone your heart can stand to live with." Across the yard, Marcus waved and Hale nodded once before turning toward the light. As the camera of memory pulls back, the image lingers. 3 generations, 3 faces changed by truth. No one wins, no one loses. They simply learn. And in the stillness of that morning, justice feels less like punishment and more like healing. And that's where this story leaves us, not with revenge, but with redemption. It reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about change, compassion, and the courage to face who we've been and who we can still become. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who believes that kindness and accountability still matter. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful tales that speak to the heart and remind us why humanity is worth believing in. Your support means the world to us. It gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that touch souls, spark thought, and stand for justice. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, every story carries a heartbeat, and every listener keeps it alive.